Hi and welcome back. Today or rather my avatar, will be talking about scripts and animation. Scripts make an essential part of my pipeline. For me, using them are like using a cell phone in everyday life. I can't even imagine going anywhere without my phone that has maps, calendar, internet, and all the other apps, you name it. Scripts help saving a huge amount of time. You probably can't even imagine how much. Some operations, if done manually, can take several hours, but with the help of a script, they can take 2-3 minutes or even less. In the long term, this can save you hundreds, if not thousands of hours. Just think about these numbers. And I'm not exaggerating it at all. Let me give you an example. I worked on a project with lots of different characters. And we had an auto rig that had to be applied to the skeletons with their existing animations every time. I can't demonstrate exactly how it worked for the obvious NDA reasons, but I'll show you an approximate pipeline using one of Killfigures' rigs. Sure thing, this one already has a rig, but let's imagine that it didn't exist, and it was added on top of the animation. After that, since it was applied in some default state, it had to be further adjusted, like switching arms to FK, legs had to global modes, and other details. And when I work with rigs, I always hide most of the controls and only work with the basic ones. They allow me to achieve 80% of the result and ease my work. Only during polishing, I turn on everything else and finish with the final touches. In addition to these controls, I sometimes enable the fingers as well, so they're not in one pose throughout the entire animation, and I set several poses for them. So if after applying the rig on top of the FBX, I manually adjust it and hide all the controls in layers, it will take me around 2-3 minutes. And having done it about 50 times, which is almost 2 hours of work, I realized that I couldn't live like that and needed to automate it somehow. I simply copied a bunch of different commands from the script editor that I did manually every time and put them all in one script. So I just pressed one button and the script in about 20 seconds overlaid the rig, distributed everything into display layers, turned off the visibility of unnecessary layers, and gave me the rig in the form needed for animation. Considering that I applied the rig for about 1,000 times, multiplying 1,000 by 2-3 minutes, taking an average of 2.5 minutes, it's like 2,500 minutes, which is 41.5 hours. Plus, consider how much mental energy it saved me, since doing monotonous, boring work is not very exciting. So we'll add another 6.5 hours of time, which is the time of suffering from all the injustice in the world and frustration about having to do the same thing over and over again, manually. Oh God, why do I have to do this and all this stuff? Then we'll get exactly like 2 days. This means that I spent 2 days just preparing to work on my animation. And this is just one example and the most common one in my work. When you start thinking about this topic, you can seriously reconsider your approach and think about automating routine things. You can easily copy some things from the script editor, there's nothing complicated there, and experiment. Watch tutorials on YouTube, and there are plenty of them on scripting. I'll show you some basics in this video just a little later. Let's start with the scripts already written by other people. When you open a new script, the first thing you need to do is familiarize yourself with the tools it provides. Of course, there'll be a lot of information to absorb in one go, but making an overview to assess the scale and capabilities of the tool won't hurt. Most likely you won't even remember everything at once, but that's not so important. Some information will still definitely stay. For example, when I first downloaded Animbot, I spent hours on Alan Camillo's website. I watched and rewatched the clips, checked what each slider did, and of course I didn't immediately understand how to apply everything I saw, but some of it sparked the thought, hey, the way I'm doing it takes like 3 times longer. I should start using this or that Animbot tool. Later, when doing some random animation task, I'd vaguely remember that there was a slider in Animbot related to this or that task I was doing. So I opened it, refreshed my knowledge, and that's how, bit by bit, I could fill my pipeline with all sorts of convenient buttons and commands. And you can do the same. For me, there are 2 main scripts without which I can't imagine my work: Overrig and Animbot. Overrig by Pavel Barnev is a one-time purchase and you can use it until you retire. Animbot by Alan Camillo is subscription-based. Both are very reasonably priced for what you get in return. If you wish, you can find the first version of Animbot script called A-Tools. It's no longer supported by its creator. So if something doesn't work here or there, it's unlikely anyone will fix it. But Anibot is so feature-rich that if you can afford at least the Eco version, don't hesitate for a second between ATools and Anibot. Definitely choose Anibot, you won't regret it. But if for some reason it's still too expensive for you, then go with ATools. It's also quite good, and as far as I know, some kind person has adapted it for Maya 2023. I won't go into great detail about each script I use, but I'll explain briefly what possibilities they have and how it's recommended to work with them. Again, always keeping in mind the automation of the work processes. First, let's talk about Overrig by Pavel Barnev. This script is very convenient and fast. I use it every day and I keep it open all the time. With this script, you'll understand that locators are your best friends. If you want to understand what each button does, check out this video to get acquainted. There's a lot of information, of course, but you have to start somewhere. Ideally, it would be good to also take Pavel's course on working in mockup. I understand it might seem like I'm promoting his products, but I've been through this path myself, and I'm always sharing what I'm confident about and what I tried myself. In this course, he shows in great detail how and where he applies his different scripts, especially Overrig. There's nothing better than having both a good description of a tool and also some examples of where and how you can use it and apply it. Based on this, you can come up with your own ways of using it. He also has a lot of free information on his YouTube channel, so if you're interested in increasing your speed and productivity as an animator, go no further. That's your fountain of knowledge that will help you work much faster. So, my advice is check out all the videos on his channel as I did in my time. And by the way, there were also, I think, 2 videos about scripting, which are quite understandable if you already mastered the basics of scripting. Remember that our brain can't be absorbing new information for a long period of time non-stop. In schools and universities, the educational process is divided into sessions with breaks in between precisely for this reason, to allow the brain to reboot. So, if you watch at least one video a day, with time it will yield results. In addition, you can bind Overrig commands to hotkeys, which is very convenient since some of them are used very often, for example, inside and whirl, but we'll talk a bit more about hotkeys later. Give yourself time to study the tool. Don't think that by watching a video once, you'll immediately learn how to use everything and remember it all. It may take some time, depending on how serious you are about understanding everything. Start small. Start by using these 3 buttons, understand what they do. Once you get used to it and are ready to integrate more into your pipeline, move on to the next cluster of commands to learn. For example, I can tell you for basic animation you need these sections. If you understand what each of them does and how, your speed will increase significantly. Alright, now Anibot, another cool tool which has no few useful functions. You probably won't use all of them, maybe not even half, but it depends on your approach, of course. I just found the commands I needed, assigned them to hotkeys, and added some to the toolbar. So the learning path is the same as I mentioned earlier. Go to the Anibot website and check out the explanatory GIFs, which are pretty good there. Anibot also has cool commands that you can bind to hotkeys. I also added some to my pipeline, and when I worked with mockup, my speed of work with curves reached a totally different level. I'll try to demonstrate it here. This is approximately how I work with curves. When your brain remembers which hotkeys to press, it almost makes your hands press what's needed before you even consciously realize it. It means I understand that I need to do an overshoot here, and my fingers automatically press the necessary hotkeys. You know, it's like touch typing. At some point, you just don't think about what your fingers are doing. So you don't think, I need to execute such and such command, so I have to press this hotkey. Which one was it again? Oh yes, Ctrl-A. The brain commands you what to press and when. Really, it's a fascinating process, I think. So get familiar with the tool functionality, think about what you need right now, put it on toolbar, assign hotkeys to all the buttons you need, and when working with animation, apply them as necessary. And periodically, think of whether you can add something else to your pipeline. Layer script, another script by Pavel Barnev for easy layer management. Again, Pavel showed a lot about it in his course, but there's also free information on his YouTube channel, so go ahead, watch and learn. For me, the most important function is merge layers. I don't remember if it's possible to bind a hotkey to this script, but I've set it up for myself and used it 100 times per day. The second most important is export animation to additive layer. Another one from the category of save me a ton of time. so I strongly recommend understanding where and when to use it. I think Pavel also had something on this topic on YouTube, if I remember correctly. As you can see, a large part of my approach to animation is acquired from Pavel Barnev. I was really inspired by his vision of animation, and in combination with the foundation I mentioned in the previous video, Physics in Animation, animating became a very straightforward process overall. Of course, there are still difficulties with the artistic aspect, such as finding a good idea for animation, creating a good camera, animating facial expressions, acting, and more, but these are different side skills that also need to be continuously developed. However, this doesn't mean that I've already reached perfection in the technical sense, as my pipeline is far from perfect. There are still many areas where improvements can be made, but our goal is not to achieve perfection in automating animation routines, although it would certainly be beneficial, but rather to make our lives easier and cut the number of boring manual tasks as much as we can. For example, I have 40 animations for one character in a scene: idle, walk, run, hit, and others, and I need to add clothing animations to all of them. Some basic movement is already there, but it needs further refinement to behave realistically. Of course, I could try to do it manually, and when a new character is added, I have to do it all over again manually, but I could spend a couple of hours creating a script that will do it all for me. I understand that this is no longer basic scripting. Simply copying commands from the script editor won't solve the problem. But if you can write such a script yourself, this level of scripting is more than enough to cover 95% of your needs. And surely all these scripts can also be used in the future for any other animation. Since you wrote them yourself, it won't be difficult for you to adapt them to a new similar task. Let's talk about shelves and basic scripting. Let me show you the simplest example of how you can quickly add a couple of basic buttons to your shelf, so you can see that there's nothing difficult about it. For example, constraints and loops. I'll put part of it on the shelf and show you how to have multiple commands in one button. I actually have constraints assigned to hotkeys, but loops are on the shelf. When you create a constraint from one object to another, a command appears in the script editor that was executed when you press the constraint button. You simply copy it, paste it into the area below in the Mail tab, and use this button to add it to your shelf or bind it to a hotkey. You can easily find information how to bind a button to a hotkey on YouTube. You can also add multiple commands to one button by going to this tab. Here, on the left, you can give the command a name, and on the right, you write the command text. There's also the drop-down menu here. For convenience, I add an empty button that does nothing, but separates standard buttons from the buttons with assigned commands. You can do the same with loops. Instead of going into the drop-down menu in the graph editor every time, you can easily add these commands to your shelf. I hope this is all clear. If you're interested, you can search for similar content on YouTube, and I think you'll find plenty of information there. My scripting skills are not strong enough to teach you thoroughly this topic, so this is more for general information. And a bit more about shelves. Sometimes I watch tutorials on YouTube and always pay attention to how many buttons animators have on their shelves. Sometimes I wonder why experienced animators have only 5 to 7 buttons, as in my opinion, it's simply impossible to work this way. Of course, I assume that animators are not showing their main working shelf. That would be the only reasonable explanation here. But if you look at my shelf, you'll see that it's quite full, and some buttons in the drop-down list have additional commands. And here's my shelf where I keep various obsolete commands. I used to put them there because some commands were moved to hotkeys, some became unnecessary, some were optimized into another scripts, or appeared in Overig or Animbot. And this is a very clear example of how much has been reworked in terms of automation in one form or another. All right, let's move on. The next one is FCM Hider by Francisco Cerchiara. Sorry if I pronounce it wrong. It's a free script that I often use when working with complex characters that have either many limbs or many secondary objects. In this script, you can add your character's geometry or controls, these buttons, or hide them whenever it's necessary. And as a bonus, when you hide the shapes of the controls on these buttons, the controls color doesn't change, unlike when you place shapes on regular display layers. Usually, when adding control shapes to display layers, the controls take on the layer color, which by default is dark blue. Of course, you can change it, but it will still paint them all in one color. You might wonder, why hide control shapes at all? It's very simple. Some rigs are done in such a way that if you hide the root control, almost all controls of the character will be hidden. But if you only hide the shape, then only that specific one will be hidden. And also to note that the creator of this script has a cool FCM multiview for a very convenient animation playback from different angles. Highly recommend. Next, Tracks Editor or Time Editor, which are standard tools in Maya. I don't use these editors very often in gameplay animation, but for example in cinematics or cutscenes, I think I could use Time Editor more often. In my pipeline, I use these editors for three things. The first one is to quickly blend two animations. I mean creating a stitch draft animation from two different ones. Second case is when I use it to retime animation with heavy rigs. If I try to do it with the graph editor, it can take a huge amount of time. But in Tracks or Time Editor, it happens much faster because Maya doesn't need to visually update all the keys in the graph editor, which is actually the reason why everything slows down so much. And finally, the last one is when I'm using it to add several different mocap takes to one scene. If I simply retarget the scene and import mocap there, it simply replaces all the animation that was in the scene. But if you add it through the Time Editor, then it sequentially inserts new mocap takes. Of course, there are many more possibilities in these editors, and most likely very useful ones. But again, this is about improving the pipeline. You need to continue to deepen it and expand the number of tools at your disposal. And of course, long-awaited hotkeys. It's hard to say that hotkeys are less important than something like Overrig or Anibot, since it's hotkeys that add the convenience to your work when you first start working with Maya. They have the most impact on your workflow speed, starting with the very basics like playback or switching between frames or keys left and right. I've partially covered the hotkeys topic while speaking about Anibot today, and now I can show you what hotkeys I have assigned. Also, I've transferred some commands from Overrig to my hotkeys to make the work even faster. These are the buttons like Inside, World, Across, and Bake. Also, hotkeys are assigned for baking all layers or creating a layer from the layer script. And on hotkeys, I have assigned Constraints, Parent, Point, Orient, and Euler Filter. So, as soon as you feel that you are doing some operation manually very often and it's not very convenient, for example, like deleting a key, then just bind it to a hotkey. Tired of clicking on the Constraints tab every time? Use a hotkey. Copying keys, hotkey. Creating a layers, hotkey. Merging all layers, hotkey. Baking animation, you guessed it, hotkey. Actually, I remember when I switched from the Cascadeur program to Maya, I had a certain set of hotkeys from Cascadeur, but in Maya, either the commands were very different or there were many additional commands that also needed to be distributed among the hotkeys. So what I did, I simply wrote down all the hotkeys on a piece of paper and kept it in front of me. So in the beginning, I could always check it to see what key combination was for this or that action. Yes, it was painful and inconvenient, but in a week, I started to get used to it and my life as an animator improved significantly. Studio Library. Unfortunately, I don't know who created this wonderful tool, but all animators who use it are infinitely grateful to the creator for their efforts. In my pipeline, I don't use it very often, and somehow I managed to solve problems with transferring different animations and poses in other ways. But I know that the vast majority of animators are using it, so I also recommend looking into this tool. The same goes for Animation Picker. I often hear that many animators create different pickers for their characters. I can't really appreciate this tool as I usually use the selection sets from Anibot, but again, many animators prefer this tool, so I can suggest you to check it out as it may be the missing piece in your workflow. And another plugin, Ragdoll from Ragdoll Dynamics Company. I've seen many videos demonstrating animations made with the help of this plugin, and as a fan of physicality, I really like it. The range of tasks that can be solved with this plugin is very broad, and you can also easily add physicality to your animations using it. Look, today I talked about ready-made scripts, basic scripting, and the workflow optimization. But for a beginner animator, this might seem too complex and overwhelming. I can suggest a path similar to mine. When I first switched from Cascadeur to Maya, I learned about Reparent, a script by Dmitry Kolpakov. The light version has very few buttons, but it's an ideal start for optimizing your workflow. Try it out, experiment, understand how things work together. Later, you can purchase the Pro version if you like it. It offers more functions and capabilities, allowing you to tackle a wider range of tasks. Over time, I discovered Overrig by Pavel Barnev. As I continued searching for ways to optimize my work and help with numerous different tasks that gameplay animation has, I started using Overrig more and more. In its early versions, it had fewer functions, of course, but over time it became very rich and now it makes the essential part of my pipeline. As you can see, there are many more functions here. If you understand how each of them works, animating will become much easier for you. These guys also offer their own courses. Personally, I don't know Dmitry, but I've heard a lot of good things about him. He's a great generalist and animation matter with extensive experience, so check out his page on Gumroad. You might find a lot of interesting stuff there. For example, I often hear from other animators about his overlapper script. And also, as far as I know, he has his animation course, and there are some basic courses listed here for self-study. I know Pavel Barnev personally. He's an animator with 20 years of experience, and he still continues to animate with a very cool and deep approach to automating all animation processes and workflow in general. Probably more than 80% of my technical knowledge about animation comes from him. I took his courses on mocap and game skinning. The mocap course is for advanced animators who aren't afraid of baked animation. It's an excellent way to deepen your understanding of animation in general, so if you want to become faster and stronger, this course is essential. The skinning course is also suitable for those who know nothing about it, so if you're interested in this topic, you're welcome to join. Pavel also has a bunch of cool scripts on his page. I haven't used all of them, but I can vouch that they are no less cool than his signature Overrig. And honestly, I can't even imagine my workflow without this tool now. Oh, and let me also mention Richard Lico. In his videos, he talks specifically about my favorite center of mass, about how to create it in Maya and how to use it to refine animation. Since he also left the center of mass, I decided that I could definitely trust his recommendations as well. It was through his videos on Vimeo and GDC that my journey into scripting began. I'd suggest you to check out his videos from SIGGRAPH 2018. They'll have plenty of interesting and useful information. There you'll find info about offsets using aims, about space switching, where you constantly transfer objects from one another for simpler animation. He also had some information on how you can easily achieve beautiful secondary movements through baking all locators and subsequent offsets, and much more. Like, these things are basic to me now, but at that time it was a whole new world that I wanted to explore and understand how it worked. And by the way, Richard also has his own course, Animation Sherpa. If you're ever in doubt about whether to take it or not, I'll definitely tell you, take it. Alright guys, let's summarize everything we've discussed today. Scripts are a huge part of animation. At first, they might scare you, you might strongly dislike them, find them boring, tedious, uninteresting, but if you want to be faster and more valuable as a professional, I would highly recommend befriending them. And actually, there is nothing to be afraid of. It might be even fun to think about how you can automate this or that process. In fact, I've noticed in myself that often I don't like what I don't know, and scripting used to be something I didn't like either. But when you start to succeed at something, it no longer seems like such a dull and sad activity. In Maya, there are two languages used, Mel and Python. It's hard to say that one is more difficult or easier than the other. They're roughly equal, just with different syntax. It's probably easier to start with Mel because when you copy commands from the script editor, you're copying them in Mel. And even just by copying, you're already doing the most basic and straightforward scripting, as you're combining different buttons and creating a new script that performs several operations for you. These are your first steps in mastering this side skill, which is so important in animation. Even if you don't delve into it too much, it will still bear fruit and give you advantages in your work. So I highly recommend you give it a try. Yes, at first it will be difficult. It was the same for me too. Yes, the script editor will sometimes annoy you with the incomprehensible errors when you try to write something on your own. But don't stop, keep trying, watch various videos on YouTube on this topic, try copying and combining things yourself, and at some point things will start making sense to you. Also, remember that you have two great assistants in this matter. The first one is documentation, where you can find 90% of the information and examples of how things work or help you understand what went wrong. At the bottom of each command page, there are usually examples that can give you an idea of how it should be written correctly. And the second assistant is, of course, Google. People have been asking questions about scripts for over 20 years, and now you can find an answer, or at least a partial answer to any question you may have. So guys, don't ignore the scripts. They're your friends. With their help, you can increase the speed of your work by 2 or 3 times or even more. I wish you good luck in shaping your animation workflow. See you!